Good morning. Again, it is wonderful to be together, and we had a fun and edifying, enjoyable day yesterday. We had a great day yesterday as we had our creation explorers, as we called them, working through their book, doing a field guide and thinking through the way that what the old preachers would call the book of the world and the book of the Word speaks together, two ways that God reveals himself to us. And there's so many lessons, and the natural world reveals God, and then we start to fully understand who he is as we connect that with the truths in his Word. And tonight we're going to complete our VBS weekend with one of the nights where we invite the kids to sit up front, and we're going to focus on some amazing Bible stories about animals and what that teaches us about the Lord and his provision and protection and who he is. The theme of this VBS weekend was fearfully and wonderfully made. And of course, that comes from that passage JT read to us in Psalm 139. And it makes me think of the song we sang, My God and I. It's really a focus. It's really a song about, and a psalm about, the connection. If we want to understand ourselves, if we want to understand God, we start to see that we are his creation, and we really only understand ourselves when we see how he shaped us, where we were created for a purpose. And, at some point in life, you start asking questions, these big questions, like, where do I come from? Well, Psalm 139 talks about where you come from. Lots of theories out there about where you come from. The Bible has a clear answer for us. Or, where am I going? And Psalm 139 talks about that. Why am I here? And we start to see that in Psalm 139. But all of these come down to one big question that at some point, as you're going through adolescence and your teen years and all of those times of questioning and thinking and starting to identify a unique place for yourself in the world, we ask, who am I? What's going on? Why am I here? Well, who am I? Where am I going? What's all this about? What's beyond? What can I see? Well, Psalm 139 helps us to understand that as well. And so as we look to this passage and start to think through all that it teaches, it's just an extraordinary psalm. I want to take us back to this statement we looked at in the welcome. Wonderful are your works. And this is a word, wonders and wonderful, that describes throughout the Old Testament the great miracles of God, the great acts that bring people to a sense of amazement. You think of what he has done. Think of all the stories and the truths that we read about throughout Scripture, about the parting of the Red Sea and the flood and the sign that he gave after the flood. You think of the great things Jesus did, feeding thousands, healing the dead. But then at some point you go back to a pretty big act of wonderful works when God made all of this. And he continues to make and sustain things. The Bible doesn't talk about God's work like a top that he spun once and then he stepped back and said, okay, that's going pretty good. Now I'm going to attend to other business. The way the Bible speaks of God is he is working constantly. He is making the sunshine today. You have a breath in your lungs right now because of his will and power. He created each one of us. He did it. The fact that he has created a natural order takes nothing away from it. In fact, it makes it all the more extraordinary as he continues to do his ways in these amazing, predictable, and yet astounding ways. And so we look around us at creation and we say, wonderful are your works. We look around and we see the cheetah that can go from 0 to 60 as fast as Jeff's Mustang, go to 75 miles an hour. We look at the super slow sloth in its movement and the super fast beating of the hummingbird's wings. Like lightning, that thing moves. Well, then there's lightning itself striking down from the heavens. We think about the human eye. The emails that Jeff sends out sometimes talk about some of the wonderful ways that God has made things, including us. Think about the power that we see in the galaxies and all of the different formations out in the stars, or the power we see in the eye of a hurricane. There's the sparkling bioluminescence in Maldives and the amazing aurora borealis up north. There's the giant sequoias that Adrian's family likes to go up into the mountains and see up in the redwood forests. And then there's those tiny little things like the water bear, amazing little creature. God made all of them. But he says here, the psalmist declares, as he says, wonderful are your works. Did you notice what this passage is actually about? I will give thanks to you. This is the same verse, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. The God who made all of this made you, made Ephraim. The God who made all of this shaped Sora, shaped you. And the psalmist is speaking. This isn't, sometimes there are these anthem these days just about how you need to remember that you're special just so that you hold on to that. But this is get that you're special, get that you're amazing, get that you were created in this extraordinary, wonderful way so that you get something bigger than that, bigger than even you, so that you get who God is. And so we see, I am a wonder, therefore I am a worshiper. This is a psalm ultimately about who God is. He's not saying, look at me, I'm the greatest. Have you ever looked at something amazing, so amazing that you started thinking, how did they make that? And you start thinking, I don't just appreciate this creation, I admire its creator. That's what the psalmist is doing here. Whether it was a dress that you thought was beautiful, Anna, whether it was an amazing bite of food that some chef crafted, whether it was a story or a movie, whatever it is, an incredibly designed car, you think, wow, someone made that. And the psalmist looks at himself and says, you made me, and therefore I lift you up. Wonderfully made. The idea is God crafted you in a way that brings amazement. But he doesn't just say that. Isn't it interesting? It's a strange phrase, fearfully made. God was afraid? Well, it's not exactly the idea here. But whenever you're working on something, maybe you're working on a science project for the science fair, and you're cutting everything, and you want to cut it out perfectly, and you're shaping each thing, and you're not afraid of it, but you're bringing a kind of close, careful attention to it. That's how God made you. I am fearfully made. And when we see this, we need to understand, I want to notice three things about this. The purpose we see, and the potential we see and the personhood we see in each human. Not just in us, but in all of us. Not just in you, but in your coworker and your classmates. You have an extraordinary purpose. You were created in the beginning to, this is crazy, you ready for this? Rule with God. Genesis 1, what did he do? He made everything else, and then before he rested, he built this person to bear his image, and he said, you subdue it all, rule over it, continue my work. He had just brought order and fruitfulness. And what does he say for us to do? He said, I want you to garden. I want you to tend to these things. I want you to continue my work as my image bearer. You have a purpose to do wonderful things. Will we imitate God in doing good things, righteous things, amazing things? Humans are doing great things today and continuing his work, bringing order, bringing creation. And the greatest work we have is to bring his kingdom out into the world. We are his image bearers, that we reflect his glory. And in order to do that, he gave us this extraordinary potential. He made us unlike anybody. We talked about in the welcome our ability, simple thing, to sing a hymn. My kids have been singing hymns maybe since they were 1 year old. Certainly by 2, they were singing hymns. Singing hymns and understanding what they're saying about God. Now think about all of the other amazing works. The skies are declaring his glory, but they're not singing a hymn that they understand when they say, Jesus loves me, this I know. Cheetahs are amazing, but they do not humble themselves before God and say, wonderful are your works, this my soul knows very well. We can see his glory. We can see his glory in every created thing. But you were made with the potential to reflect him uniquely in everything you do. And the way you do it is going to be different in many ways than the way I do it. We've had classes here for songwriting, hymn writing. Not everybody's doing that. Some people here, we have some amazing hymn writers here. More than one. More than just Michael. He's amazing. But we have some other really great hymn writers. We have artists, and we've had classes here where we used artistic skills to try to glorify God. The way that Jeff and Bob take care of this building and think through engineering solutions to our problems here physically, I could never do. We reflect his glory in the way that we serve him, and we serve him in unique ways. But he made you in a way that you can do something extraordinary. And again, I want to bring us back to think about what that says about God. Now think about the amazing engineering feat of building a spaceship, right? Going to the moon. Now think about how great an engineer it would take to engineer an engineer who can engineer a spaceship. See, God didn't just make spaceships. That's nothing. He made the one that makes the spaceships. All those people running around at NASA, he made all of them. and all the stuff they're working with. And he made the moon they're trying to go to. He made everything. He is the context and basic reality of everything. You think about the things that we see and we think are beautiful and amazing. Steve wrote about this morning, our whole week, like probably his. I know Justin's was all about Frozen the musical because our kids were in this musical. And there's all this crafting and producing to make a little world on the stage and to make a costume and to make a song. But God made the background and the ability to do all of these things. And the idea is that we are to use that potential, that extraordinary potential, to glorify Him. And we see in this psalm the personhood that begins from the beginning of this person's existence. In fact, before the beginning of this person's existence, God is writing out all of his days. And there's a great debate today. When does a person begin? When does personhood begin? And it affects some of our political issues, but it affects a lot more than that as we think about it. As you carry around a life, if you're a mother, or as you contemplate and put your hand on your wife's belly and think about that child, is that a person? Not born yet. Maybe they're the size of a grape. You know, you have these apps that tell you, okay, now it's the size of an apricot, and you keep seeing, well, what point does it become a person? And when we read this, what JT read in verses 13 to 16, you see there is a continuity with who David is as he is writing it and who he was as God from the very beginning started shaping him. You were forming me. You were knitting me together. Personhood. You are a unique person, as is each one that you meet. You hold a baby and you don't know, what is this person going to be? God knows. We sang that song, My God and I. It talked about the days that come that will go. He talks about the days that went before me and the days that come ahead. And he knew who I would be. You were dreamed before you were born. God was aware of you and knew of you and thought of you. In fact, the psalmist says, how precious are your thoughts to me, how vast is the sum of them. His thoughts, not just generic thoughts, but in context, his thoughts about you. He knows who you are. I am not a knitter. My wife is a knitter. And many of us most recently have been blessed by Gizalu's knitting. And these are some of her creations. She sends stuff over to us and knits these pillows. And she knit a sweater for my nephew and all the things that she creates. So I asked Adrian to get me out some knitting needles. And I picked the biggest ones. I thought these were cool. Now, I want you to think about knitting. And think about the fact that says that God says that he was knitting you. He uses these terms. He uses a couple different terms, weaving and knitting, to describe how he made us, how he put us together. So let's talk about God knitting a strand of human DNA. Not something giant that you could do with this. Kids and adults, how many of you have used Lego instructions to put something together? Yeah, you follow the instruction books. It's not a lot. Usually it's like 4 pages, and it's all pictures. It's not a lot of writing. But you use the instructions, and it tells you how to build something, right? Your DNA is the instructions on how to build you. And inside that DNA strand is all of the instructions for how to make a you, how to make a James, how to make a Esme. It's all there. Now, I made a few notes because I won't remember this. So a single human chromosome contains 20 billion bits of information, and one strand of DNA contains 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. 184, okay, so that would equal, and this is by some math that Carl Sagan did, that would equal in one strand 4,000 books, or in one DNA, or in one chromosome, in one DNA strand, 184,000 books in one strand, which according to my research, the average public library has significantly less than this. This is our library, the DuPont branch that Leah works at. Think of one strand of DNA carrying hundreds of thousands of books worth, a library of information. And how big is that library? A strand of human DNA is 2.5 nanometers in diameter. How big is that? There are 25,400,000 nanometers in 1 inch. So a human hair is about 100,000 nanometers wide. 2.5 nanometers versus 100,000 for one strand of your hair. I mean, Ant-Man can't get that small. This is way, way, way small. And yet, if you stretch the DNA in one cell all the way out, it would be about 6 feet long, and all the DNA and all your cells put together would be about twice the diameter of the solar system. This is the instructions for you, and this is the care with his, as in my imagination, little knitting needles. God is putting together your DNA strand, and then putting together all of these chromosomes into a you. And you are different. Your DNA is different than anybody else's. Your traits, all these things that make you uniquely you. You are shaped by God wonderfully and fearfully. And that should change the way we think about ourselves, because we should understand the love and care and place that he put us into in his creation, and reflect that back. But it shouldn't just change the way you think about you, it should change the way you think about every human. Every person has this care put into them. Every person has this potential. Every person has this purpose. Everyone you've met, everyone you haven't met is created for this. And so we have to treat them as such. James says in James 3, and that talks about the idea of cursing someone who is made in the image of God. Someone who is made with this love. Paul puts it a different way when he talks about mistreating someone for whom Christ died. Jesus died for every person to help us fulfill our purpose and come back to him. And it certainly should change the way we think about God. I'm a wonder, and therefore I'm a worshiper, and I am known. Known. This word, the Hebrew word is yada, and it's used 7 times in this passage in Psalm 139. It's the key word, to be known. You have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down, before I do it, before I say a word. You know it. You know my heart, know my thoughts, he prays. And then there's 2 references for the psalmist. He says, I praise you. That's that same word, yada. For I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. You are known. You ever feel like nobody gets me? That's a common teenage idea. Nobody gets me. I just feel so misunderstood. God gets you. God knows you. God understands you better than you understand yourself. This is an intimate picture here. You are known. Tim Keller, I love this quote. He said, to be loved but not known. Stick with this. To be loved, somebody loves you, but doesn't know you, is comforting but superficial. They don't even know me. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. They know me inside out, and they do not like what they see. But to be fully known and truly loved is what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense, humbles us out of our self-righteousness, and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us. In 1 Corinthians 8, Paul says, if anyone loves, he knows God. He is known by God. Known by God. Fully known and truly loved. But this psalm wants us to know also that we are never alone. We didn't read JT didn't read this part, but he talks about being hemmed in behind and before. In verse 7, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you're there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest parts of the sea, even there, your hand will lead me, and your right hand will lay hold of me. If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me and the light around me will be night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light are also alike to you. He's with you everywhere. He's with you in the womb. He's with you in the grave. He's with you right now in your chair. He's always there. Paul, reflecting on this same kind of idea, talked about in Romans 8 how nothing can separate us from the love of God. Those of us who hold to God will never be out of his presence, out of his love, out of his mercy. We could list divine attributes. We talk about all the omnis. Omnipresence, that means he's everywhere. Omniscience, that means he knows everything. Omnipotence, that means he's all powerful. And still somehow, as we think about these as like philosophical terms, we can still keep God distant, like he's just out there. But there is no distance from God. That's the psalmist's point. Coote said, the God of Psalm 139 is not omni this or omni that. The tone of such terms is wrong. Here's how I put it. His knowledge of us is personal. If you read this, he's not just saying, you're so knowledgeable. That's a fact. You're everywhere. That's a fact. You're so mighty. No, his knowledge is personal. His presence is intimate. His power lets us think this thought. The reckoning of God is constant. And there is a judicial terminology. There is a thinking and evaluating that is happening throughout this psalm. But so are his infinite loving thoughts about us. We are known. But there is with this sense of a reckoning, this sense of the psalmist bringing himself completely before God, there is something sobering. It's not all comfort to everybody. Because if you don't know God, if you're not in fellowship with God, this can feel very different. I've felt that way. I remember before I was baptized, thinking about these omni attributes, thinking about how he knows everything about me. And I was thinking about the way that I dug out Asher's Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe book last night, thinking about the way that Aslan is described, this lion. At the name of Aslan, it said, each one of the children felt something jump in its inside. Edmund felt a sensation of mysterious horror because Edmund was going down a dark path. But Peter felt suddenly brave. It says, people who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. If the children had ever thought so, they were cured of it now. For when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the golden mane and the great royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes, and then they found they couldn't look at him and went all trembly. This is obviously a fictional picture of this lion, but it's trying to reveal something about the good who Paul in Romans 11 describes as good and severe. Behold the goodness and severity of God. He is always loving. Everything about him, he is love. But he is always holy. He is always righteous. He is always good. And he wants to take us and lead us in that path. Hebrews 4:12-13 talks about this idea of the Word of God as a two-edged sword. And it says it discerns thoughts and intentions, and it leaves everyone naked, bare, completely revealed before him. And so when you could take this and you could read this from the perspective of an Edmund, right? From the perspective of someone who is afar and opposing God, and see a different tone in this, not the comfort. And so it's important that we see as we go through this, that David, when he gets to where he's talking about, I'm against your enemies. If somebody's against you, I'm against them. They got a problem with you, they got a problem with me because I am with you. I am committed to you always. When we see him at the end say these poignant words, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me, test me, and know my anxious thoughts. He says, I invite you. Before it was a fact, you know me. Now it's an invitation, a prayer. Come and know me. And see if there is any wicked way in me. If there is any false way in me. And then he says, and lead me in the way everlasting. That's the heart of the thing. This is who you are. God made you. God made you to be loved and be in his presence forever. And he shows us the path. He says, I will lead you. And we call on him to lead us. And then we have to submit our lives to him. And so we trust him and we obey him. And we say, this is what my life is going to be. I confess that Jesus is the one. He's the Christ. He's the Lord. And I will follow him. And we turn and we are baptized into him. And then we continue. When we get off the path, we come back and say, search me, lead me home. If we can help you as you try to serve the Lord, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.